It has been, I believe, 8 months since I talked about Limbo on this channel, and I felt like it was a really good time to revisit him right now. Out of the entire Warframe roster, he is easily the most flawed Warframe in the game, and even though I absolutely love playing him and making builds and setups, there is just no denying how controversial this Warframe is in its current state. No amount of enjoyment I get out of this frame could make me overlook how many problems he has, especially when regarding team play. So in today's video, we're not just going to go over the same build we previously have. Today's focus is actually talking about all of his individual skills and some changes I'd probably like to see in the future, maybe just some suggestions on how to make his kit way more healthy for the game and less flawed overall, and just make him a better Warframe in general. Before we get into the skills, let's give a quick bit of context for any reason as to why you'd want to listen to my input on this topic. I'm a really big fan of Limbo. He is one of my favourite Warframes, even though he is really perplexing, and we've shown on this channel multiple times already just how effective you can be with his Rift Surge. A synergy between his kit that a lot of the player base doesn't know about because it isn't explained anywhere in the game, that's just Warframe in a nutshell, is the ability to spread his Rift to enemies whilst you're in the Rift yourself without having to leave it, essentially making you completely invincible and safe whilst pulling enemies into your dimension. I'm going to cover this as quickly as possible as to how it works. If I cover it too fast or it's too hard to understand, I'll have the other two videos linked in the description and there'll be cards on screen. But here's how this works. Cast your Stasis, banish a group of enemies, roll to enter the Rift yourself, cast Rift Surge, hold down your first ability Banish, cast Rift Surge again, and then hold down your Banish again, and then repeat the cycle over and over. And as long as your build is built for a large amount of range, this is going to pull every enemy nearby that gets clipped by that Banish explosion into the Rift with you. This has to be done with a shit ton of range. I'm talking overextended Augur Reach, Stretch, even Cunning Drift. There's a really safe way to pull enemies into your dimension and make use of the Rift Torrent Augment. Just thought I'd cover that again real quick because it is important to today's topics when we go over the abilities. Limbo's biggest flaw. If you look at every other Warframe in the game, all of their abilities do a very simple function when you cast, and that is benefit you and all your allies. There is no 50-50, there is no two sides as to whether or not it benefits you or your teammates. Their abilities only do good things for your allies, and Limbo is the exception. He directly interrupts the gameplay loop between interacting with enemies, doing damage with your weapons, and all around makes the gameplay experience very confusing, especially for new players. Of course, when teammates are banished, they need to be on the same realm of existence in order to interact with other enemies, meaning that the enemies also have to be banished as well, and vice versa and such. And whilst your teammates do have the ability to control whether or not they want to stay in the Rift after entering it via Limbo's control, whether it be from his passive or banish, they unfortunately don't have access to enter the Rift upon their own accord. The teammates can't just banish themselves. So Limbo essentially has control over the battlefield, but also control over your teammates, and it's not really in a seamless way. It's very easy as a Limbo player to accidentally banish your teammates when you don't want them to be banished. And to be honest, the benefits teammates and Limbo gets from being in the Rift, they're far more beneficial to Limbo himself than they are your teammates. All your teammates are really getting is the ability to be completely invincible to enemies outside the Rift, which is only useful if you are a Warframe with an ability that deals direct damage to enemies, and a lot of damage at that. So for example, an exalted weapon. Of course, plenty of abilities in the game deal direct damage, but Limbo can just make exalted Warframes invincible, and they'll just be able to run around and damage with their exalted. But what if you accidentally banish a Harrow, especially a new player Harrow at that? Or what if you banish the entire battlefield with Rift Surge? They can't enter the Rift themselves. A new player may not even know how to exit the Rift via a roll. I have run into players that genuinely don't know what the Rift is before, and Harrow's abilities don't deal damage, so he would just be completely screwed. So how do we go around Limbo's kit skill by skill to reduce this problem? Let's start off with his passive, which I mostly think is okay. I think the most important thing would be an indicator that pops up on the screen whenever your teammates enter the Rift via either a banish from Limbo or if they enter his Rift that he leaves on the ground from the passive. Just a small indicator somewhere on the screen that says press X to leave the Rift, just so they know they can roll out of the realm. And then allow interactions such as, terminals for example, for you and your teammates while you're in the Rift. It may not make sense lore-wise to be able to interact with a terminal whilst in the Rift, but gameplay is far more important. If I'm in the Rift, I should 100% be able to interact with a terminal. It also gives Limbo more uses across the game, being able to blitz through missions such as rescues in Still Path, oh, I want to hack this terminal, let me just go in the rift real quick and then I'm invincible. You can't just sit here and act like Revenant doesn't exist, because he can already do that. Overall, I think his passive is okay, it just really needs that quality of life. As for his Banish, the AoE on the Banish is a problem when it comes to your allies. When cast, this ability does send out an AoE and will banish multiple enemies at once within its cone. The issue with this is that teammates will also get banished if they're in the same AoE. I've been on the other end of this and it is actually kind of annoying. That's coming from someone who really likes this character and knows how to leave the rift. Getting accidentally banished by Limbo is really frustrating, especially when it's happening over and over in a mission. I think this is an easy fix. The AoE banish that you do when you tap the ability should not banish your teammates whatsoever. If you want to banish your teammate, you should have to hover over your teammate with your reticle until a toggle indicator pops up, into which you can directly banish them. Also, banishing allies doesn't really do too much right now. Sure, it can make you invincible. We're talking about Warframe in 2025, where pretty much every frame in the game is really hard to kill. This would be more useful if your teammates could interact more effectively with enemies outside of the rift and of course terminals and such, but I think there should just be more benefits. So banishing teammates should also probably give them a bit of a damage buff, as the augment to heal them is just simply not that effective. And they should also bounce back to Limbo. If he banishes a group of enemies, they should get debuffed. I think debuffs are a great mechanic in this game. I think it's a bit boring just constantly buffing yourself with something like Raw, so integrating a damage debuff to every enemy that you hit with Banish would be really nice for Limbo's overall damage. It would act very similar to Equinox's Rest and Rage. Moving on to Stasis. I think this ability is actually pretty good overall. I don't really have too many bad things to say about it. My only suggestion would be that there was a cool playstyle you used to have with this thing which wasn't particularly effective, but it could be cool to be brought back as an augment. Stasis used to freeze all of your bullets mid-air whenever you shot them, and then once you uncast Stasis, it would send out all those bullets at once. Not with any damage multiplier, it was just cool to see, all of those bullets fly at the enemy at once. So it really did just have no use. My idea for an augment would be called Stasis Dispersion. You create a small void bubble upon holding Stasis. Shooting your projectiles into the bubble freezes them until dispersed into the heads of frozen enemies with a 25% damage multiplier. So let's say you're in Cataclysm, or maybe you've rift surged a bunch of enemies and there's just a lot of people in the void. Your Stasis is already active, and then you hold down the skill. Limbo will place down a very small bubble in front of you, probably no bigger than his torso, and then you can just spray your weapons into the bubble. And once you got a few magazines off, you could hold down the ability again to disperse all of those projectiles from that bubble, and they'd automatically hit the heads of every enemy that is currently caught within void in Stasis. And of course, giving it a little bit of a 25% damage multiplier that could also be modded with strength would give this some actual benefit, because outside of that it wouldn't really be too useful other than the fact that it'd be fun. But yeah, Stasis is pretty much fine. Okay, but now we have to talk about Rift Surge, which there's a lot to speak of here. My biggest gripe with Limbo right now is how I generally just think he is high-key fucking arse without Rift Torrent. I know there's arguments for him being useful in other missions, defense and such, where you're not trying to be aggressive and spread a lot of damage. Warframe is a heavily damage focused meta right now. Rift Torrent is amazingly fun and should be integrated into his kit without the augment. It is literally the #1 reason why Rift Surge is even useful in the first place. Outside of the augment, all it does is spread the rift whilst you sit safely within the void, which you already discussed earlier as to how you do that. So yes, it does have Limbo's arguably most useful mechanic for solo play, but when you're spreading the rift with the mechanics we discussed earlier, you're not pulling your teammates into the void at the same time. It's just you and the enemies and you gaining the damage buff, so your teammates don't even really get to play the game unless they have an exalted weapon. But yes, back to it, this augment should be integrated into the base ability. Kind of like how they did Ash recently with his teleport, giving him the fatal teleport buff onto the base ability and then changing what the augment does. Anyway, we'll get on to addressing how we can fix the rift spreader mechanic and teammates in a second. Also, just keeping the rift dimension mechanic is difficult. It could be easier letting the rift coat your teammates with damage reduction and still letting them kill enemies in the void, but then Limbo's unique powers and interactions with exalted frames, for example, are gone and he just becomes another Citrine. So this is what Limbo really needs. There should be multiple ways for a teammate to choose how and when they enter the void, and the buffs from Rift Torrent and debuffs from Banish, as mentioned, should apply to them in order to incentivize entering the rift. So how do we tackle these issues? Maybe aiming at a banished enemy for a second brings up an interact prompt for you to enter the void, but if any sort of interactive prompt is either too slow for Warframe or just really boring, I think a very simple way to fix Rift Torrent is to allow the rift spreading mechanic that we discussed earlier to not just banish the enemies in AoEs, but also banish you and your allies. Think about it, if I'm in the void and I'm spreading the rift with Rift Surge, exploding enemies with banish left, right, center, all these mini bombs are going off of banishes and everyone's coming into the void with me, I'm getting a huge rift torrent buff. But it's just me and the enemies in the void and the teammates can't interact with them, especially depending on the Warframe they're using. This wouldn't be an issue if my allies also enter the void with me, and this should be able to be done either through banishing them directly with the same skills, basically just making them enter your gameplay loop, or allowing the ally to enter the void in multiple ways upon their own accord, which we already just gave suggestions for. If everyone is getting pulled into the rift at the same time, then everyone can interact with each other, and the benefits you and your allies get from being in the void whilst the enemies are also in there with you is that the enemies are frozen with stasis, you get constant energy regen, teammates should also benefit from the rift torrent buff by the way, and then throwing that damage debuff that we mentioned adding to banish earlier, making sure all of those buffs apply to your team would incentivize them to be in there with you anyway. So instead of having this problem where you're separating your allies and your enemies, Rift Surge would instead allow you to bring you, your allies, and your enemies all into the same realm of existence, being the void, getting all the buffs and benefits, whilst your enemies are just frozen in stasis and free for the picking, essentially just making him a win-win Warframe with no 50-50. And finally, let's talk about Cataclysm. The obvious issue being nullifiers, and I cannot stand the argument that this ability is good against nullifiers if you build it for low range. Having to adjust an entire build that makes his other skills less effective purely for one enemy against one faction, well, two factions I guess, is a joke. Imagine all the changes we just listed are applied and it makes spreading the rift via Rift Surge actually beneficial to both you and your team without disrupting gameplay. But then, oh, this nullifier comes along and keeps getting rid of all of your either bubbles from Cataclysm or Rift Surge spread banishes, stasis. Nullifiers do just suck, right? But a Rift Surge build is easier to deal with nullifiers than a Cataclysm bubble. The reason being is that nullifier bubbles are going to take out enemies from the rift one by one if they're frozen from Rift Surge. But if they hit your bubble, your entire bubble just closes immediately, and then all of a sudden your defense objective now doesn't have the protection which you're trying to achieve. What I'm saying is that this skill needs a range toggle mechanic. Either a meter which you can drag and adjust to increase or decrease the size, or a selection of 3 sizes to cycle through, much like the way Vauban's, Titania's or Jade's abilities work. This way you can adapt the range on the fly for objective protection, and to prevent annoying your team by having too much range. And you don't have to fuck up your build just for one particular mission type, because you can build for high range to benefit your Rift Surge and banishes without making Cataclysm a roam-wide banish with the potential to annoy your team, as you just shrink your Cataclysm when needed. And then, as for nullifiers in general, they just need to be nerfed versus Limbo. It feels like a lot of Warframes can easily handle nullifiers now, as they're not directly affected in the way that Limbo is. Limbo's problem is that his skills like to use a lot of range, and if the skills themselves, such as Cataclysm, gets clipped by a nullifier bubble, it is instantly destroyed. Nullifiers should either shrink the bubble slowly if they're moving in closer and connecting both bubbles, or they should just have to hit Limbo directly with the nullifier bubble in order to close his Cataclysm. It's much easier to avoid getting hit by a nullifier bubble yourself than it is to avoid your very large bubble getting hit by one. You can't look at every corner of the map when you have a Cataclysm down, and if there's multiple nullifiers coming in at once, you're almost guaranteed to have it get closed at some point. And having to build for short range just to make this skill actually tolerable is really ridiculous. Nullifiers are absolutely an issue with Limbo, and pretending like they're not is not going to help making him a better Warframe. And that's going to be it from me for my updated Limbo video. Let me know whether you guys agree or disagree with my ideas on how to make Limbo a better Warframe. I do think he'll get reworked eventually. He definitely deserves it. He's one of the most flawed frames, if not the most flawed in the game right now. There's still ways to make him extremely fun. Also, before I leave you, a quick apology for the lack of uploads over like basically the past week. I was super on top of stuff, completely caught up with all my content, everything was going smoothly, and then I got sick for 3 days and then I lost my internet for I think 3 or 4 days as well. So I've just not been able to finish this video or get ahead on any of my other content, so right now I've got to play catch up. I hope you guys enjoyed as always, appreciate the support on the channel. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. If not, then no worries, and I'll see you guys hopefully in the next video. Take care.